Okay, I guess we can call this meeting to order. During the declared state of emergency, this meeting will be conducted in accordance with the California Government Code 54953 as authorized by resolution of the City Council. Please contact city.clerk@mountainview.gov to obtain a copy of the application resolution. All members of the Public Safety Advisory Board will participate in the meeting by video conference with no physical meeting location. Members of the public wishing only to observe the live meeting and not make comments may do so on YouTube at youtube.com/mountainviewgov. As noted on the meeting agenda, members of the public may provide oral public comments online during the public comment period for an item by joining this webinar using the link https://mountainview.gov/meeting and entering the webinar number 818-8324-0262 or by phone by dialing 669-900-9128 and entering the webinar ID 818-8324-0262. Any emails received by 4:30 p.m. today were forwarded to the PSAB. Emails received after 4:30 p.m. will not be read during the meeting, but will be entered into the record for the meeting. Ms. Ramberg, would you please take the roll call?
Yes, Chair Frank,
Present.
Vice Chair Wang,
Present.
Member AR.
Muted.
I see you present.
Present. I really just physically, not mentally, clearly.
Member Brodowski,
Present.
Member Langton,
Here, present.
Member Sandhu,
Present.
and Member Tang.
Present.
All members are present.
Thank you very much. Item number 3 is oral communications. Item 3 is oral communications from the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the advisory board on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for a period of time, depending on how many are here. During this section, state law prohibits the PSAB from acting on non-agendized items. Would any member of the public like to provide comment on an item that is not on the agenda? If so, please click the raised hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone, and I will check to see who would like to chat. Hang on one second. Yes. There we go.
I'm seeing Dana Petey with her hand up. Do you want me to allow her
Yeah,
to?
I just haven't gotten to it yet. I'm sorry. Okay, yes. Dana Petey, 2 minutes.
Hey, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm doing different technology tonight. Thank you so much for publishing the packet so early. There's tons of really useful information there, and we really appreciated having plenty of time to go through it. 2 quick questions or requests rather on behalf of MVCFRA. The first of which is we're really excited to learn more about the RIPA data subcommittee report out. And we're still curious if there'd be a way to have a standing agenda item for each of the subcommittees to report out. Just even brief updates on whatever they've been working on since the previous meeting, especially with fewer meetings on the calendar this upcoming year. It seems like a good way to stay abreast of everything going on with the various subcommittees. The second thing we wanted to ask about is, given that this is likely to be the last meeting that is in a purely virtual capacity with no physical meeting location at City Hall, we would love to hear that you're going to continue to meet with hybrid capacity beginning in February. We've heard the atrium room is where many other groups are going to be meeting because it's already set up with AV technology to allow for this to happen. We've also heard that, they're trying to equip a number of other rooms with AV capacity. And so that'd be great. The more the merrier. It'd be great to have lots of options. But we hope at least the February meeting will start somewhere that is AV ready to go so that we can keep this open line of communication and transparency that has been so usefully built over the last couple of months. And then at that point, if there's more options for more rooms, once others are online, then obviously the more options, the better. Those are our requests. Thank you so much, and look forward to hearing from you all.
Next speaker is Tim McKenzie.
Hi all, Happy New Year. Actually, the previous speaker took what I was going to say right out of my mouth. Looking forward to meeting in the meet world and in person when we have that option. And I'm sure it's not really within the capacity of the board to deal with infrastructure in City Hall, but maintaining hybrid options like City Council has been doing, really great for transparency, great for accessibility. Looking forward to meeting in the meet world as this happens, but really would hope to be able to see us maintain a hybrid option. We are in the heart of Silicon Valley, right? If anyone can do it, it should be us. So why not provide a model for others to follow? So I hope that will be taken into consideration.
Chair, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I believe that will complete everybody. So we will now close the oral communication item and move on to discussion items. Number 4 is minutes approval. Does anyone have any comments or questions about the meeting minutes? Okay, does it look like? Yes, Kavita?
I just had a point of clarification. If I wasn't at the last meeting, do I abstain from voting on the meeting minutes? Voting to approve the meeting minutes? I wasn't quite sure how that works.
You can, but it's not consistently that's what people have to do. So we have enough people here to have a majority vote without your vote if you feel most comfortable abstaining.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so no one else. May I have a motion?
I move to approve.
And second. Mr. Langton. And Ms. Randall,
Second.
would you like to take the roll?
Yes, Chair Frank,
Yes.
Vice Chair Wang,
Yes.
Member Ayar,
I'll abstain.
Member Brodowski,
Yes.
Member Langton,
Yes.
Member Sandhu,
Aye.
and Member Tang.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 5, an update for services for residents living in vehicles and enforcement of parking regulations. Recommendations. This item will be presented by Assistant to the City Manager, Kimberly Thomas, Human Services Manager, Parneet Shinda, Dehinsta, Police Captain Scott Nelson, Lieutenant Matt Atkins, and Community Outreach Officer Janleif McPherson, who I am dying to ride with on a ride along.
I'll start us out and I'll ask Jennifer to bring up our PowerPoint. And thank you. Good evening. Thank you, board members, for inviting us here tonight. You'll see we've got a team of folks from the City Manager's Office, Human Services Division, as well as the Police Department here to speak with you tonight about this important issue associated with our residents that are living in vehicles. Tonight, we'll cover in our presentation a very brief introduction and overview of human services, living in vehicles, background information, our overarching services and programs, a bit of background about the management of the public right-of-way, as well as police outreach and enforcement data, and time for questions and response. And I'll ask Jennifer to advance the slide. There we go. That is our agenda shown on the screen there for tonight. And we will have ample time at the end, as I just noted, for questions. We'll go to the next slide. Offering a bit of introduction to human services and what we do here amongst the team, including our police department. Really, homelessness is a significant regional, statewide, national concern. And locally, it does require a team approach internally here at City Hall and in partnership with external agencies. The city balances the unhoused homeless needs with neighborhood needs through collaboration and coordination. It includes a team of the police department, fire department, public works, community services, community development, which is planning and housing, and the city attorney's office. In addition, we work very closely with the city manager's office multilingual engagement program for translation of our collateral and communications to reach our lived-in vehicle residents. We work to develop solutions for issues related to homelessness and overall public health, community safety, and quality of life in Mountain View. Integral to these efforts is the collaboration with the Police Department Neighborhood and Event Services Unit, or NES, that the PD team will be talking about more tonight, which works to balance compassion and enforcement of parking and other right-of-way management solutions and regulations. Next slide. The city has built over a number of years very strong partnerships with external agencies that include the County of Santa Clara Office of Supportive Housing, as well as community-based providers to leverage resources and expand public and private partnerships to provide the programs and services that we'll discuss more deeply with you tonight. The recently established Human Services Division that is staffed by our Human Services Manager, Parneet Dinsa, was created through the elimination of a vacant police officer position. And as Audrey highlighted a bit earlier, it leads our formulation of policy and recommendations and response strategies to homelessness overall. These services overall include housing, mental health, outreach, case management, and other basic needs and human services. These needs and services related to homelessness populations can be viewed within a continuum of coordinated care. This includes homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, emergency shelter, and interim temporary housing. The city has addressed homelessness across this broad continuum over the last 6 years. One of the services does include safe parking, which is one type of temporary housing, and housing is in quotes, but it's a form of assistance and program development and support that is included along the continuum of care. Over these last 6 years, the city has committed nearly $11 million in funding, capital, and operations to serve residents who are homeless or unstably housed, going beyond the scale of what is typical for a city of Mountain View size. Next slide. Understanding of what human services does and how it serves our most vulnerable, our homelessness residents, it's helpful to first understand a bit of the definitions about what homelessness is and how it's considered at the federal and state and local level. HUD doesn't have a specific category for individuals living in residence, but we treat them as unsheltered, and the county counts them as unsheltered through their county biannual count called a point in time, or you'll hear it often referred to as a PIT count, P-I-T. That count counts by sheltered and unsheltered. And so our living in vehicle residents are included in that unsheltered number. And that's really the lens that Parneet and our team and all of us look at, is sheltered and unsheltered when we're trying to strategize and come up with solutions and ways to assist these residents. The city has worked to establish these services and programs really broadly, but also specifically targeted at our living in vehicle residents. In particular, the city has facilitated outreach to encourage engagement with case management to get residents on the pathway to more stability and ideally longer term stable housing. To share more about the city's vehicle count trends and other details, as well as living in vehicle programs and services, I'm going to hand it to Parneet Dinsa to continue.
Thank you, Kimberly. The County of Santa Clara's most recent point in time count was in 2022. The count indicated there were 346 homeless individuals in Mountain View. This is a decrease of 43% from the prior count in 2019, which was 606 homeless individuals in Mountain View. To augment the information from the county point in time count, the city also conducts a street-by-street count of vehicles that appear to be in use for living purposes. This count has been conducted at least once per year since 2017, with the count of vehicles in the public right-of-way used for living ranging from 200 to 300 vehicles. And recent counts are trending downward. Since the December 2018 count, more than half of the counted vehicles have been recreational vehicles. Between the count in February 2020, which was before the opening of the safe parking lots, and the most recent count in August 2022, there was a decrease in vehicles used for living purposes in the public right-of-way. Although this decrease was not by the same amount as the number of vehicles that joined the safe parking program. Next slide. The city has continuously collaborated with the local emergency assistance network of community-based organizations and providers to combine and leverage resources to help as many people in need as possible through a range of programs and services. The needs and services related to homelessness can be viewed within a continuum of coordinated care, as Kimberly mentioned earlier. This includes homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, emergency shelter, and interim/temporary housing. Across this continuum, services also include programs to meet basic health and safety needs that are important in their own right, and also support the ability of residents in need to sustain stable housing. In addition, services and programs for the living and vehicle population have been a council priority since 2016. And finally, the effectiveness of the continuum of coordinated care relies on extensive communication and coordination across providers, as well as ongoing outreach to residents in need of assistance. Next slide. As Kimberly had also mentioned, homelessness is a significant and growing issue, driven by many factors, notably a shortfall in housing supply and affordable housing throughout the region and the state. The city of Mountain View has focused on a variety of strategies to address homelessness, including congregate shelter, outreach services, safe parking, community resources access and case management, interim housing, basic services, core housing programs, and sanitation and hygiene. The overarching goal is to support residents to access services and get them on the pathway to housing. Some examples of this include partnering with the Valley Homeless Healthcare Program to conduct site visits and provide backpack medical care, funding of portable restrooms and mobile showers and washers and dryers to help address basic hygiene needs, expanding the city's support of portable restrooms and hand wash stations throughout the community, and providing funding to Community Services Agency, commonly referred to as CSA, to expand mobile shower services. Next slide. As mentioned earlier, services and programs for the living and vehicle population have been a council priority since 2016. City of Mountain View actions specific to the needs of residents living in vehicles include funding for basic services programming for the cold weather shelter programs, funding basic health and safety services such as biohazard waste cleanup services, funding various hygiene services over the years, including significant expansion during the COVID-19 pandemic, and conducting pilots to test solutions, such as a recreational vehicle sanitary waste disposal voucher pilot program. Next slide. Additional actions specific to the needs of those living in vehicles include the city providing joint city and county funding for CSA outreach to individuals living in vehicles for 3 years and conducting ongoing multilingual outreach strategies using multi-channel communication to meet the homeless where they are. Furthermore, the city has convened the faith community and neighboring city agencies to discuss solutions to address the growing need for assistance in serving the unhoused in Mountain View. The city has also developed a safe parking ordinance and permit program for private lots, funded the startup of a nonprofit Move Mountain View to provide safe parking services, created the largest safe parking program in the county in conjunction with the County of Santa Clara that operates 24 hours, 7 days a week, provided all necessary safe parking site setup and lot preparation, supported the Human Relations Commission Subcommittee for Safe Parking Outreach on its efforts to secure additional safe parking lots, continued to lead efforts to identify new lot opportunities, and contributed to the development of longer-term state legislative solutions to promote safe parking for all cities. And now I will hand it over to Lieutenant Atkins to discuss the management of the public right-of-way.
Thank you, Praneet. The next 2 slides will consist of necessary information to know and understanding the management of the public right-of-way. For instance, there are different laws that govern and functions that must be provided for the public right-of-way. And public right-of-way refers to an area of real property in which the city has a dedicated or acquired right-of-way interest in the real property. This area is not intended for exclusive use. The city owns its right-of-way both in fee and in street easements over private property. Both right-of-way types are legally defined as being for public use as a street and for the purposes of laying, installing, maintaining, repairing, protecting, and replacing sanitary sewers, water mains, storm drains, gas mains, poles, overhead and underground electrical and telephone wire, cable television, and other municipal uses. The city's right-of-way also provides a limited supply of on-street public parking for all to use. The maintenance and operations are funded by the city. The city's restrictions and regulatory parking is permitted in the California Vehicle Code and specified in the Mountain View City Code. Next slide, please. As noted in the previous slide, there are certain regulations that people must follow for the safety of others. Specifically, the management of public right-of-way is regulated and maintained for parking access and safety for bicycles, pedestrians, and car mobility. For example, this allows for a vehicle line of sight and turning clearance, bicycle and pedestrian access, adequate width for parking, and fire hydrant access, to name a few. There are also a variety of parking restrictions, including time limitations. The purpose is to promote parking turnover in order to keep the parking available for general public use. An example of this is time limits for areas with high parking demand. We also regulate for environmental protections with state and regional standards. The purpose is to clear the parking lane for maintenance, repairs, and constructions in the right-of-way. Examples include temporary no parking for pavement, sidewalk, curb, tree, storm drain, or utility work. Lastly, we manage underground and above ground utilities. This is conducted to meet federal and state regulatory requirements. And examples include street sweeping to keep debris and pollutants out of the storm drain systems and outfalls to the creek and the bay. To note, advance notice of temporary no parking restrictions is usually provided. Then I'll hand it off to Captain Nelson.
All right, thank you, Lieutenant Atkins. I'm going to cover the structure of the police outreach and enforcement team in the next few slides. The overarching unit that covers our outreach and enforcement is called the Youth and Community Services Unit, which is comprised of 2 units. The first is our School Resource Officer unit that works with the schools. And the second is our Neighborhood and Event Services Unit, or NES, which you may have heard. The NES unit was formed in 2017. That was in response to an increasing need for outreach efforts for those experiencing homelessness and the living in vehicle population. The NES team consists of 1 dedicated sergeant, 1 community service officer, and 1 community outreach officer, which is currently Jenlea McPherson. And our most recent selection for that position did include 1 member of the community on the panel member for that selection process. And the NES unit is the primary unit that we use for education, outreach, and enforcement for those experiencing homelessness and the living in vehicle population. Could have the next slide, please. This slide goes over a brief background of enforcement related to Measure C and the Narrow Streets Ordinance. So in March of 2020, all time parking enforcement was suspended due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Just prior to that, in March of 2019, the Mountain View City Council passed Ordinance 14.19, which was referred to as the Narrow Street Ordinance or the Measure C Ordinance. This ordinance restricts the parking of oversized vehicles, including boats, large trucks, and RVs on streets that are 40 feet wide or less to address traffic safety concerns. After the ordinance was passed, a referendum was placed on the November 2020 election ballot, in which the Mountain View voters approved the Measure C by 56.6%. In July of 2021, a lawsuit was filed over the voter-approved Narrow Streets Ordinance. After the lawsuit was filed, the city agreed to a stipulation where we did not enforce Measure C until the ordinance reached a tentative agreement in September of 2022. After the tentative agreement was reached, enforcement of Measure C and the bicycle lane streets began on October 1st of 2022. One of the terms of the settlement agreement states that enforcement of Measure C and the bicycle lane streets will only be conducted by members of the NES unit. The agreement also did recognize that at times it may be necessary for other officers to engage in enforcement related to Measure C. Our internal process is that if a call comes in for one of these type of complaints, it will be entered primarily for an NES member to respond to. If they are not available, a patrol officer will respond to the location and assess for any potential violations. However, if there's no immediate need for enforcement, that incident will be forwarded to the NES unit for follow-up. Also on October 1st of 2022, all timed parking enforcement, including 72-hour enforcement, resumed. Starting October 1st, we also started receiving an increase in the number of 72-hour restriction violation complaints coming into our department. The NES unit, along with other parking units, including our parking assistants and community service officers, responded to these complaints. While some of these complaints identified oversized vehicles being in violation, other vehicles, including passenger vehicles, cars, trucks, boats, were also located parked on the same streets that had been in violation of the 72-hour restriction. Also in October of 2022, we did several education and outreach efforts. We continued to monitor all streets, not just for oversized vehicles, but also for 72-hour violations and using an educational and enforcement approach. This approach began with identifying vehicles in violation of 72-hour restrictions and placing yellow warning cards on them. We also met with community groups, advocates for those experiencing homelessness and the unhoused, oversized vehicle residents, and concerned residents as well. We could go to the next slide, please. This slide covers the settlement agreement related to how citations or tows may be made related to Measure C or bicycle lane streets. I'm just going to walk through steps 1 through 5. So the first one is to provide warnings and distribute parking maps to vehicles parked on narrow streets and streets with bicycle lanes. So this was completed prior to October 1st of 2022. Our NES team went out to all of the locations where we could find oversized vehicles and gave them maps and notice of the tentative agreement. Number 2 was to post no parking signs on narrow streets and streets with bicycle lanes. All streets on the parking restricted map have been posted with either the narrow street sign or the bicycle lane streets. Just to note, steps 1 and 2 were all completed prior to October 1st, before any enforcement began. After October 1st, if an oversized vehicle is parked on a narrow roadway or a bicycle lane roadway, a parking citation can be issued for either violation. If somebody from the NES team does issue a citation, the following must also be provided. a notice of parking violation, which is a form that provides explanations about the violation, and also a parking restriction map will be provided to them along with the citation. If at least one citation has been issued and the vehicle remains at the location, the vehicle can be towed within 72 hours after the citation has been issued. We could go to the next slide, please. I'm sorry, back one slide. There we go. This slide discusses the circumstances when an immediate tow could occur. The first one is not related to Measure C or narrow streets or bicycle lane streets. If a vehicle is obstructing traffic or blocking a driveway, that vehicle may be towed under the California Vehicle Code. The second one is for a repeat offender. So an RV that has 3 parking citations for violation of narrow streets and a bike lane ordinance issued at least 72 hours apart at any time during the effective period. This exception cannot be used until the settlement agreement is fully executed, which will be announced at a later date. The effective period begins the date of the settlement and goes for a period of 4 years. And next, I will turn it back to Lieutenant Atkins.
Thank you, Captain Nelson. Follow up with a previous slide that mentioned the 72-hour enforcement. This slide explains the 3-phase enforcement approach that we developed. The first phase will consist of chalking around or on the vehicle tires. Then we move on to the second phase, which will be returning after 72 hours and providing every vehicle in violation of the 72-hour restrictions with a pamphlet warning of a possible citation or tow. And then the third phase consisted of returning after an additional 72 hours have passed and issuing citations to vehicles remaining in violation of the 72-hour restriction. Next slide, please. This slide shows the enforcement data regarding the oversized vehicle parking citation on narrow streets. From October 1st to October 31st, there was approximately 42 vehicles that were cited on narrow streets. From November 1st to November 30th, there was approximately 6 vehicles cited. And then from December 1st to December 31st, there were approximately 9 vehicles cited. No vehicles were towed for oversized vehicle, no oversized vehicles were towed on narrow streets, but 2 vehicles were towed for expired registration that were parked on narrow streets. This data shows that the majority of individuals have complied with the narrow streets ordinance. Next slide, please. This slide shows the enforcement data for the parking in excess of 72 hours. We started collecting this data on October 13th, and for the month of October, from October 13th to October 31st, there's approximately 211 passenger vehicles that were provided with pamphlets. Of those 211 vehicles, approximately 8 passenger vehicles were issued citations. There were approximately 127 oversized vehicles provided with pamphlets, and of those 127 vehicles, there are approximately 23 oversized vehicles that were cited. 1 vehicle was towed for parking in excess of 72 hours in that October timeframe. For November 1st through November 30th, there were approximately 116 passenger vehicles provided with pamphlets, and 0 passenger vehicles were cited. There are approximately 89 oversized vehicles provided with pamphlets, and of those 89 oversized vehicles, 14 were cited. No vehicles were towed for parking in excess of 72 hours in November. For December 1st through December 31st, there are approximately 12 vehicles, passenger vehicles, provided with pamphlets, and 2 of those vehicles were cited. There are approximately 115 oversized vehicles provided with pamphlets, and 34 oversized vehicles were cited. 3 vehicles were towed for parking in excess of 72 hours. Should be noted that an additional 17 vehicles were cited for parking in excess of 72 hours through our AVASA, or Abandoned Vehicle Abatement Service Authority program. So those would be vehicles that were not inhabited and were determined to be abandoned. It should also be noted that our community service officers and police assistants chalk for the phase 1 approximately 200 to 700 vehicles per week This combination is extremely time consuming, requiring the police department to allocate a number of resources for the enforcement of this process. And also recently, our NES unit has started to eliminate phase 2 of providing the pamphlets to some of the areas that it was determined that the majority of the individuals in those areas were well aware of the 72-hour requirement. And next slide. And this side, we're up for questions that anybody has for us.
Thank you. Okay, do any board members have any questions before we open this item up for public comment? And yes, Ms. Ramberg first.
Just wanted to ask if staff could stop the screen share.
Very good. Okay, I don't have any particular order, so I'm just going off my screen, so please don't be mad at me. I'll start with member IR.
Okay. I'm not mad at you because you picked me first, which was the right thing to do. Good job. So I had a quick, just one quick question. So these are questions for the first part of the presentation from Parneet and from Kimberly, and then the second part of the presentation from the PD. Are so questions across everything, or are we doing it by section, or just wanted to check? Across everything?
That
Yeah,
works.
sure. Why not?
Okay, I have a number of questions, so I'll just keep raising my hand, just so you know. Okay, so my first question is for Parneet and for Kimberly. So thank you for your presentation. I appreciated that. I felt that the content of your presentation was really helpful in understanding what the city has done to date. But I'm not clear what is still valid, if that makes sense. Like, what is still going on? Like, there was a pilot, you know, there were hygiene services, but I know those got dialed back. So I'm wondering what's the best way to get a snapshot of what is happening right now? What is still active right now?
I'll respond to that. Kimberly Thomas, Assistant to the City Manager. And what is currently happening in terms of our programs is the continuum of care is what we are focused on. So some of the emergency related programs like hygiene, that's not operational now that we've transitioned from COVID, although as we highlighted for you in the memo, we have recently added back some hygiene services at our CSA and Hope's Corner location. And then our main focus is on basic programs such as that, providing hygiene services there, funding showers at Hope's Corner, and then in addition, focused on safe parking. That's really our core area that we are working right now on to expand. And so the only programs that are covered in our memo that was linked in as an attachment, as well as the overview that we provided you, were some of our COVID specialty programs and one of our key pilots, which was a number of years back, to check whether we would have viability for a RV waste dump location. Those are a handful of the small programs that are no longer in existence.
Okay, thank you. So just to clarify, I understand that the porta potties have been installed at both Hope's Corner and near CSA. The majority of RV dwellers do not reside near those areas. So I am wondering about the possibility of, and I've heard this from our community-based organizations that serve our vehicle resident neighbors. I'm wondering about the possibility of actually putting porta potties where people need them more, and if that would be feasible.
That is something that the city did look at. Obviously, during COVID, we made some special considerations where we placed upwards of 8 to 11 different locations throughout the community. And at this time, we have studied that and looked at that. And our challenge is balancing the needs of the overarching neighborhoods with the needs of our living and vehicle residents. And so our strategy is To provide those restrooms at our key safety net providers, they are available 24/7, in addition to all the city facilities that are open during dawn to dusk, including our parks and other locations that we know serve our homeless population. Our strategy is to focus on those sites and those sites only. The provision of restrooms at locations is something that is relatively limited outside of the city of San Jose. San Jose does provide restroom services to a number of encampment locations, but in Mountain View, thanks to the efforts of our PD team, we don't have large levels of encampments. We have more of our focal locations with our lived in vehicle residents.
Okay. All right. So I guess I'll just agree to disagree that people within RVs can't always get to those safety net locations. And especially in the middle of the night, if I live over on Independence, how the heck am I supposed to get over to Hope and Mercy to use the restroom, right? So what I'm concerned about is what I'm seeing, a degradation in our treatment of our resident vehicle neighbors, and hoping that not treating them in a dignified way. And this is an example of that. I mean, I see during the day, but in the middle of the night, where are you going to go to the bathroom, right? And I think this is the type of thinking that gets people to say, God, I got to go on the sidewalk. Then the business complains, and then we have warfare on our streets, which is what I've been made aware of, both in my role as a community member and as a member or as someone who works at the local foundation. And I would really encourage us to think about, how do you treat people, our neighbors who live in vehicles, with dignity? And you're talking about meeting them where they are. Well, where they are is Independence and Pioneer, right? Among other places. So that's my first question. Thank you for your answer. I get it, but I'm going to challenge it.
No, appreciate your additional feedback. And I think one of the things that drives all of our programs, from the services that we've expanded for safe parking to our Home Key project, really is that dignity of wanting to serve our homeless residents. I think one of our challenges with something like placing restrooms in the rights of way is really balancing the needs of our community within the neighborhood, with our homeless residents. And so we do our best to balance that, also balancing out what are our limited resources for the city for this type of service. I can tell you that in a larger regional way, this is something that our teams look at, including conversations with the county, looking for potential opportunities for additional funding streams, additional ways to address these concerns. But what we've done is we have done that service for nearly 3 years. And then we recently, as we've noted, have added the additional services back at the 2 prime locations that are our safety net locations in Mountain View.
Okay. I need to say one more thing. With respect, the needs of the neighborhood for porta potties is probably nil. The need for those neighborhoods to not have RV neighbors is probably high. So I gotta challenge you again, Kimberly. I'm sorry, I don't buy this. And I'm a little disappointed. But let someone else go for it. But I'm gonna keep fighting for our neighbors, because not all of them have a voice here. And keep going. But porta potties in the middle of the night when you have kids and live on Independence, that's a real issue. Okay, I'll shut up.
I agree. And thank you for the time and listening to my response. Appreciate that very much. And I think what I was referencing regarding the neighborhoods is, if we place a unit in a neighborhood, we can also take feedback associated with that we are trying to encourage it for that particular location. So that's something that we're also balancing, but appreciate your comments.
Thank you. Member Sandhu. Member Sandhu.
All right, now I've got to follow Kavita. Good. It's good. It's good. It's getting everyone warmed up. And hello, Kimberly. Long time no see. Congratulations on your promotion to assistant manager. I've got a couple of questions. Is that program for the folks who live in the vehicles, right? This PD might be, anyone from the PD can help. If the vehicle is not in proper working order, obviously it cannot be operational and used, and they can't move it. Is there a plan to help them move it without charging them? That's number one. Number two, are there any procedures and plans to say, check on the safety, any fire hazards they might have, because some of them cook in their vehicles, right? So that's very important. We need this, all our residents of any kind, whether they're in the vehicles or homes or anywhere, to be safe. So is there a program to help make sure that that doesn't happen, no disaster happens, there are no fires? I mean, that's safety. That's the first part. The second thing is, now, if you say you're 72 hours to move a vehicle, and I move around the block and park it in the same place, that's the second thing, right? And finally, following on Kavita's thing about toilets facilities, is there a long-term plan how to provide safe, proper sanitation toilets with dignity to all these folks? Thank you.
I can speak to the fire and safety related information, and then Scott, if you want to jump in on that. I think we've spoken to the sanitation piece, and I think briefly I would just note that, again, it's an ongoing dialogue looking for potential funding streams and opportunities. It's something that the county, as well as our local supervisor, are trying to look at solutions for. So that's the status that we have for that. I can share regarding outreach for providing communications, education associated with how to live safely within your vehicle. We have for a number of years provided educational materials in English and Spanish that highlight ways that individuals can be safe within their units. In addition, we had a recent fire at a safe parking, one of our safe parking lots, as well as a couple that occurred in our public right-of-way. And so our fire department did do a couple of rounds going directly to our residents where they are at to share that brochure, talk with them about safety, any questions that they might have about how to live more safely within their units. And then on an ongoing basis, Jan Leah does distribute this information associated with how to be safe living in your vehicle. I'll hand it to Scott if he wants to speak more about the additional question for the police department.
Yeah, thank you, Kimberly. I can just talk about the 72-hour ordinance and how that's been applied. So the ordinance does require the vehicle to be moved 0.2 of a mile or 1,000 feet. And the interpretation of that ordinance and the legal opinion that we've been given is that that vehicle has to move the 1,000 feet and not return to the same location. And I understand that there may be some disagreement on that. I recognize that. We've discussed that with some community groups and folks. We understand that that is not specified in the code. However, that's the interpretation that we've been given from council, from our legal counsel. That's a common interpretation with other cities and how they enforce it. And I imagine at some time in the future, there may be an update to the ordinance to specify that, but that's how we've been enforcing it.
And one last thing, talking about funding, Kimberly, and you mentioned that there's funding which is needed for the toilets and so forth. I'm not trying to be a smart ass here, but I buy my toiletries from a company, great company called Who Gives a Crap. All the money they get, 50% goes to, it's an Australian company, it's also in the US, goes to building toilets in places where they aren't, right? It's obviously the third world. I think maybe we should, I should reach out and say, can we have some toilets built in Mount Grey for those who need them? Thank you.
Member Brodowski.
Hello, thank you, all of you, for your presentations. And of course, I wrote down notes with the first part. So Kimberly, it's back to you again. I think you're really getting it tonight. I'm sorry. But my questions are, well, let me start out with seconding or thirding what Kavita said. During COVID, I don't know how many people who had public restrooms closed them, including Mountain View at Rengsdorf, which drove me crazy and drove everybody crazy who was living in a vehicle. But then I take the train a lot, and one day I arrived at the station in San Francisco where there's always been really great bathrooms, and they were closed, and there was nobody there to say where I could go, and I had to go now. So yeah, I think that we ought to do a little better on the bathroom part. So my questions are, how many people ask for help and can't get it? That's one. Because you don't have any place for them or what? And I'm talking about people who are needing shelter. And when you say somebody's sheltered or not sheltered, you said that the people in RVs aren't sheltered. And so then what does sheltered mean? And how many people, what percentage of people don't get help? So those are my
Great, thank-
arrows for you, Kimberly.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you for the questions. I appreciate it, and then the opportunity to respond. The ratios, it varies from program to program, but one thing that I can tell you is countywide, and certainly that holds true for the city of Mountain View, there is not enough capacity within the overarching homelessness response system to address all the need. So on average, with the last PIT count, it was approximately 2 individuals need assistance and apply for assistance for every 1 placement. The prior PIT, it was upwards of 3. So what that means is that there are constantly more individuals seeking assistance and needing assistance than the system can provide. And that would be Mountain View, but also the 14 other cities within the county. So it is a real challenge. And I think what Mountain View has done in a major way, and we are known for this, is we have done all that we can to try to increase that capacity of both the continuum of care, emergency sheltering, safe parking, on down to larger programs that our housing team is working on so deeply, including the upcoming Crestview property, as well as other affordable housing pipeline. One other component I would share would be the clarification of sheltering versus unsheltered. It's really just a way for you to understand how we look at the lens for providing service. And that would be sheltered, meaning you have some form of a fixed structure that you are a part of. That can be a congregate shelter or an interim facility like Project Homekey, Life Moves Mountain View. And then unsheltered means any form of living where there is no fixed structure. It can still be that you might have a roof or an RV where it feels more like a home, but that is not considered to be shelter.
Okay, thank you.
Member Tang.
Thank you. Thanks for all of the information tonight. I was wondering about the communications between the NES unit and other officers that may need to respond to complaints, because I had heard of an unfortunate story about a very elderly gentleman who had his vehicle towed, and it, looking at the data, it was likely one of the 2 that were cited to have had expired plates. But what I had heard was that this gentleman had the indication on his vehicle that he had been working with Jan Land and people within that unit, but the officer responding at the moment had said, I don't know anything about that, and so the outcome was unfortunately that his vehicle was towed. And this is an elderly gentleman that's homeless and doesn't really have much. Already living in a vehicle, you don't have much resources, but even more tragic that his home was towed. So I'm wondering about the communication between departments. How's that been facilitated? How can we further improve that facilitation in the future so we can avoid situations like that?
I could take that one to start off with. Communication with one mine unit of overseeing our field operation division, as well as some of our NES units will be, until we meet with the team, NES, and our community service officers who are really out there, who are seeing what the violations are in the enforcement. And then what we try to do is then meet with other units, to include our traffic unit and our field operation division, to really have that line of communication. If there is an individual that is working with our NES unit, to provide that information. If there is some one-offs where the information is not technically received, or there's something about tow, maybe for this instance, and Officer McPherson can maybe talk a little bit more about her process after the fact. But then we will then try to reach out to them and see what services we can provide. And on those instances where the information maybe didn't go from one unit to another, we then continue to meet on a more regular basis of just updating of not just the process, but also individual cases, and talk about those individual cases. So it's really improving our communication. And then also Officer McPherson, maybe will talk a little bit about the communication that she had or has along this line.
Yes, and to
Officer McPherson, you're on mute.
there you go. Sorry about that. So to answer the question in regards to the outreach after the fact, I continue to work with the client as well as with the case managers. Since I do more of the outreach portion of my job, I reach out to, the interim housing here in Mountain View that's run by Life Moves to see if they have any room available temporarily to house the gentleman. So again, the outreach was done after the fact, and I continue to work with the community-based organizations that's also working with the client. That's
Thank you. Vice Chair Wang.
Thank you. Thank you all for your presentation. I just have a question for Scott, I believe, regarding, I know you mentioned that sometimes the officers are now moving away from phase 2 and the pamphlets because people generally know the information. I'm wondering if that means that the time frame is kind of still the same, where they have the initial 72 hours and then after what would be the pamphlet, another 72 hours.
I'll take that question.
So
what we are doing, we're not adding the 3-phase approach, actually adds an extra 72 hours. That's not necessarily, that's just to make it so the officers have enough time to get all of those phases in. So that would be eliminating some of the time, but typically officers aren't making it right out for enforcement within the 72 hours. So it's very rare that it would be a 72-hour enforcement right after. Typically there still is a decent amount of time between the chalking and then the citations.
Thank you.
Member Brodowski.
Thank you. The story about the old guy in an RV whose RV got towed made me ask some questions, because a whole lot of what we've been saying today is all in the abstract. It's all in the passive voice. We aren't talking about people, we're talking about situations. So I want to know if anybody knows this. Did the old guy who was towed get left in the street, or did he get left in his vehicle? And did he get towed? And if he got towed, when did somebody get a hold of him? And I understand he's being helped in some way. Could we hear a little bit more about where he's living now and what happened to his vehicle? Did he get it out of the clink or or what?
I could answer that for you. So the gentleman is currently living in a van. So after, obviously there was some sort of miscommunication After I found out that the vehicle was towed, I immediately contacted the shelter. We did offer to take him to a shelter in Sunnyvale, but he refused. The night when his vehicle was towed, a friend of his offered his vehicle for him to stay in, which was parked on Escuela. So the shelter was available for him. However, he declined to go to a shelter. And so in the process, working with with his case managers, he actually worked with Maria at the Day Worker Center, also at the Hope's Corner. He has a case manager there. Her name is Claire, who provided him with the new vehicle. So they basically gave him a new vehicle as a donation. So he's currently living in a working vehicle. He's still living out on the street, but it's been offered that we offered him to go to the safe parking, and also to go to the shelter here in Mountain View, the transitional housing on Leghorn, but he declined the services.
Okay, bravo.
Member IR?
Sorry, my dog's participating. I had two more questions. One was, I know we're pursuing Shoreline Lot B. How many spaces will that, are we expecting, if everything goes well, how many spaces will open up there?
I can respond to that. We are looking at bringing an item on February 14th for that expansion. Our estimate at this time is upwards of 17 or more parking spaces that will be added to the contiguous lot that's already operated by Move Mountain View. So that item will be on the agenda the 14th.
You're muted, I think.
Goodness. My understanding is there's a lot more space at Shoreline Lot B than 17. Is there any reason we wouldn't want to pursue more spaces?
The city right now is focused on creating a contiguous program. Live Nation, we've been in ongoing conversation with them. And if the city were to pursue an additional safe parking lot, it would need to be somewhere in one of the upper portions of the lot. And we would need to pursue that negotiation to expand it even further. Mountain View will be taking our numbers up to just under 120 spaces, which is by far and about the largest safe parking program in the entire county and basically the entire region in the area. And so we are doing all that we can to increase that capacity, but we are creating a contiguous zone in which the provider can provide services at that site.
Okay, thanks. The other question I had was, I think it was Matt who may have mentioned the cost of all of this chalking and citing and just administering everything in and around the 72-hour rule, which was not part of the Measure C settlement, right? That's something else. I am wondering about that cost, and whether, what it's bringing us as a city, right? To my mind, and what I've heard in my role at the Community Foundation and just being a concerned citizen, it seems that if we could use the cost of that enforcement to actually provide more services to the people living in vehicles, right, that we might actually decrease the number of complaints and deal with things like sewage, other unsanitary or biohazards, etc., that actually might, make our streets more pleasant for everyone. it's just a thought. Right now I feel that by pursuing this 72-hour the ordinance and just responding to complaints, people are taking it upon themselves to be the police. And I don't know if that's healthy for our community. I'd rather focus our efforts and our city's efforts on helping the people that are already here, right, to live in some dignity with services in a healthy way, in a well way, in a safe way, not only for the people, our neighbors who reside in those vehicles, but for their neighbors on the street. And right now, I think pursuing this 72-hour at this cost that was mentioned by the PD directly, I have to question, do we have our priorities straight as a city? Thank you.
Yeah, I can just comment a little bit on that. So the first couple months, we did receive just a real influx of complaints regarding areas of 72-hour violations. We spent a lot of time going out in October, November, and part of December, but the last probably month and a half, those complaints have really slowed down. And I think that was highlighted by some of Lieutenant Atkins' statistics about how well people were voluntarily complying with chalking. So the last month and a half, we've been spending much less time going out, responding to complaints, and doing much less proactive time going out looking for 72-hour violations, just because people have been voluntarily complying with that ordinance.
Thank you. Kimberly, do you want to speak?
No, I don't have anything to add.
Very good. Thank you. Member Tang.
Sorry, complications with unmuting. Thank you. I just had one more question. This might be for Captain Nelson. Oh, you mentioned vehicles needing to move 1,000 feet from the location after they've been chalked. And so I'm like wondering, like, what's the timeline on that? Like, are they not allowed to return to the same location like ever after 24 hours, 72? Like, what are the specifics on that?
So let's say, I guess I could try to give you an example. Like, let's say we go out there and put chalk around the vehicle, and sometime before 72 hours, they move and they don't return to that spot. I mean, they could even park a couple spots away, but they're not returning to that same spot. The code doesn't specify how long they have to stay there. So are you talking if they move to another location, how long till they can come back until the exact same location?
Essentially, or like, the same area, like within that 1,000 feet, right, of that area.
Well, as long as they don't come back to the same spot that they were parked in. And one of the things that our parking enforcement and CSOs do is they do chalk. They also take photographs of the vehicles that they chalked, so they can go back and reference that photo.
Thank you.
I'm gonna assume that you're calling me. So, okay. I just have a question for Kimberly. Kind of moving away from the current details. I'm wondering what the needs of programs that are helping these vehicularly housed individuals or families move towards alternative or transitional housing are. So for the programs that currently exist, what are some things that would kind of help, I guess?
Oh, thank you for that question. I think one of the key things we highlighted in our presentation is the ability to do outreach and to reach residents and let them know that we'd ideally like them to be assessed and become a part of the county's overarching system. One of the things that allows our vehicle residents to do is to get essential basic services right away, like medical care, but also longer term to be able to be placed in permanent supportive housing and receive vouchers. So that's a really, really key piece. And that's something that we're focusing on future efforts more deeply on as we talked about, increasing that pipeline. And we want to ensure opportunities such as Crestview, our local Mountain View residents, have the ability to ensure that they're on the queue to be considered for those placements. So that's really one of the core things. And so if you're ever having conversations with individuals that you know who are in these difficult situations, is sharing that's an opportunity. They can call CSA. They can also call the county line. There is a line that's operated by the Bill Wilson Center, and they'll take in their information and get them linked up with a case manager.
Thank you. So just one more time, they can become part of a county program?
Yes, to have access to county, it's called the county queue, and that is where resources are managed to be able to assist our homeless individuals in the county.
Thank you.
Member Langton.
Just so as far as the Safe Lots thing goes, I kind of routinely drive by the one on Shoreline. I'm just not certain how that works. I do notice that they do have water. I think there are porta potties, and I do occasionally see I think CSA might sponsor it, or some other entity brings a shower facility down there. Has some of those benefits been taken away? What specific benefits are provided for these Safe Lots versus, the benefits that you've taken away in, say, other areas of the city with regards to toilet, facilities to go to the bathroom?
I can take that one, Kimberly, and then maybe you can
Thank you.
add on if I missed anything. Yeah, sure. So great question. So we do have on-site restrooms, ADA accessible restrooms for participants at our safe parking program sites, all three of them, not just the Shoreline one. And then I believe the shower services that you may be referring to are provided by a nonprofit provider called Dignity on Wheels, DAO. So they provide mobile showers and laundry services. So they physically come with a truck on site to Shoreline and offer those services specific to those safe parking program participants at Shoreline, but also at other safe parking program sites. And then in addition, I think I had mentioned earlier, we have Valley Healthcare, their homeless program. They'll provide medical care. They have a doctor that can come on site and check out anyone who needs immediate attention. And then as well as our various safety net providers like CSA can also provide a variety of services, as well as some of the smaller organizations such as Reach Potential Movement do a lot of great work, whether it's providing school supplies, backpacks, books, things like that. So I hope that helps. And I can let Kimberly share if I missed anything.
Oh, Parney, no, that was great. I think the one thing I'd add to that is that the shower truck also includes washer and dryer services, so that our clients can process their laundry. In addition, we do provide water on site, and that was something that was facilitated during COVID-19. It was a big, challenging, and wonderful venture by our public works and utilities crews that help get water to all of our sites. There are 3 that we operate and provide continuous water services to. I would also share that the provider Move Mountain View works hand in hand with the community-based organizations that also deliver food, provide other services. But really the core of safe parking is a theme that you've heard us speak about a fair amount, is we do require case management. And that case management for each household that lives in the vehicle is really essential to getting them to a place of increased stability and to determining what the next best step would be for their family.
Is that the barrier, like, for some of these people that are parking on local streets from taking advantage? It seems like these facilities have, a a fair amount to offer. Is it a limitation on spaces, or is it a fact that people that are used to living on the streets just are kind of apprehensive about being accounted for in a location like that? Is it all of the above? Like,
I think it can be a combination of that. And I think one of the things that we really have tried over many, many years is to really establish that trust link, through the work that Jen Leah and her team do daily, and Scott Thomas out there outreaching to our lived in vehicle residents. A lot of what they are doing is bridge building and building those relationships. And that's really important. And I think that that's a key piece of it. I think one thing also would be, obviously the capacity issue is something that we're challenged by across programs. So our cold weather shelter program doesn't have enough capacity. Our safe parking program doesn't have enough capacity. So those are definite challenges for all cities and most counties within the state of California.
okay, I just have maybe two more things. I personally live on, an extra wide street that doesn't allow for mobile homes to park on it. But I have experienced neighbors that are a little more eagle-eyed to the specific RVs that are parking in the area, and whether or not they're there for an extended period of time, or if they're going to the bathroom on the street or whatever. I don't know. I personally, try to be a little bit more flexible, but there definitely are some, it seems, some neighborhood groups, I try not to be too critical, that are just this is kind of like an alarm bell for them. They're just constantly like trying to go after these people. And I don't know, I don't know how you balance, I guess this is why we have, you two people kind of managing this and trying to do the best. It's such a complicated situation. But I just want to say it's great that you're doing the work that you're doing, and I think it's an impossible situation to balance. You got some neighbors that'll like just get all of these people out of here, and some that are, a little more like these are people, and treat them with dignity, which is what I think they deserve. So I'm not really having a question. I guess it's more of a commentary. And then I have just one last thing with regards to the old guy that got his vehicle towed because of I think it might have been a lack of insurance. Me personally, I was recently involved in a bicycle accident with a vehicle where I fractured my wrist, and I'm pretty certain the guy didn't have insurance. And we kind of came to some gentleman's agreement. I think this would be more of a question to the Mountain View Police Department. Is there one in Massachusetts, where I'm come from? You couldn't get a car on the road unless you had a stamp from the insurance company that said you had a policy. It seems a lot easier out here to have a car on the road and not have insurance. Is that the case?
I could just give you a general comment on that. I don't believe that incident had anything to do with the insurance. So,
okay,
in California, we don't tow vehicles for not having insurance. They can receive a correctable fix-it ticket citation for no insurance, but we don't tow for not having insurance.
Okay, but so it is a lot easier to be on the. It seems easier to have a vehicle and be on the road without insurance. It's just a fix-it ticket.
Correct. I believe you can show your proof of insurance to DMV when you register it. But if that insurance lapses, I don't think they go out and proactively suspend your registration. I could be wrong there. But if we do encounter folks that have expired registration, it's just a correctable fix-it ticket that we issue them.
Yeah, okay. I mean, and I know for people that are on the street with RVs, that's a barrier, like another bill that would be a problem. And if they're not moving, is there really a reason they need insurance? But I don't know, from my own selfish perspective, I somewhat think people should all be insured if they're operating a vehicle if they can kill someone. But that's just my commentary. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Member Wang. sorry, member Tang.
We are two different people. Anyway, um, I'm sorry, I'm just ripping you. This is a
Go for it.
follow-up to my previous question. So say I have a friend who, you know, has a vehicle and sometimes parks out on the street. But you know, sometimes the vehicle is on the street for like a little longer because they enjoy the benefits of living in a walkable and bikeable community. And say this vehicle is sometimes a little messy. It might look like they live in the vehicle, but they actually don't. But that's beside the point. But say like a neighbor like called about the vehicle and it got chalked, and say this vehicle is usually parked in front of, you know, this friend's house. How long would it be until said friend could park in front of their house again? Question mark. For a friend.
So,
Lieutenant, yeah, I think that's for you, Lieutenant.
so you're
Atkins.
saying like the vehicle is parked in a certain location, it gets chalked, the vehicle moves, it doesn't come back to that exact same spot. When could they go back to that exact same spot?
Yeah, because I mean, the literal exact same spot is most favored.
Yeah, I would say the easiest way to avoid any confusion or any issue there is the chalk's on the ground. So just don't park right there. If you can park 2 or 3 feet forward, so you're outside of those chalk lines, that would certainly make it a little bit less confusion for your friend, and would certainly help out the officers going out there. But to give you that answer, you know, I think if it would be very difficult for us, we don't have video cameras in neighborhoods like some cities do. So we do take photos, but you know, should the vehicle be moved a couple feet either way, it'll be outside of those chalk marks. And, you know, I believe the officer probably would think that it moved from the original spot. So it's really tough to give you that definitive, like park in that spot. I would just suggest for everybody's easiness, you make them have that friend move a couple feet from where their original spot was. I think that'd be reasonable. And you can always, if somebody does get a citation, they can always come down to the department and there's a little form they fill out and they can contest it. If they have some, you know, if they have a photo of their own or they'd like to explain their situation, you can always come down and do that.
Thank you for my friend.
Member IR.
Thank you, Chair. Eva, I would name drop Captain Nelson when you move your car, or sorry, your friend's car 2 feet. So, and I'll keep that in mind.
But my suggestion was move the 1,000 feet and come back. Just don't park in the same spot, 2 feet from that spot.
But, you know, Eva's friend's car is like more than 20 years old, so there's not really an odometer on it. So how are you going to know, Captain Nelson? Just asking for Eva's friend. So I have a few questions. Well, I already had some, but I have some more. Nothing new in 2023, right? I wanted to clarify the oversized vehicle that was towed for not having valid registration. How do you know if someone doesn't have valid registration? Are you just judging that by the tag on the license plate? Or are you running, and are you allowed to run, check registration for vehicles? How did that happen?
So I can answer that. I don't know the specifics for that incident, but yes, if a vehicle is on the roadway, we're allowed to run the license plate for registration. Generally, what will kind of prompt an officer to do so is if they see the registration tab that's expired, that would usually prompt them to run the license plate to see if it is expired.
Okay.
And they can either do that over the computer in their car or over the radio.
Okay. So I understand that you can get towed through that process of if you're not compliant through all the warnings and things for the narrow streets, for the 72 hours, expired tags / registration, can you get towed for parking in a bike lane? Like immediately towed?
Not immediately towed. That would fall under you're talking about a bicycle lane street.
Yeah. Or is that a citation?
That would be a citation that falls under the same thing as a narrow street. So it would be a citation, and then within 72 hours, it could be a tow.
Okay. And then can you get towed for parking where there's street cleaning? Or is that a citation as well?
The vehicle can be towed from street cleaning, yes.
Okay.
And a couple rules there has to be signs to that effect.
Okay. Great. Thank you for clarifying that. And then my last question is, how do you know if a vehicle is not functional? So if people are not physically able to tow it, is it if they just leave a note, or right? Say Officer McPherson is not involved in the communication for whatever reason, though I think most people know her and work with her. How would you know it's not functional? And is there any way for people to indicate that? Or if you don't respond to the various notifications and it's not functional, you just get towed?
I think the best answer to that is it depends. The community service officers that do primarily the abandoned vehicle enforcement, they have a whole series of things they try to do to contact the owners of the vehicle, whether it be an RV or boat. They take pictures of it. They look for things like cobwebs on the door handles and cobwebs on the tires to see if they haven't been moved. They go out there at different parts of the day, different times of the day, different days of the week. We have the warning notifications, like kind of these yellow tabs or yellow stickers, and we'll put that on parts of the doorway that we can tell if they've opened the doorway or not. The abandoned vehicle, I believe it's 7 days from when they give the notice to when it can be towed, just given our staffing levels and the time that it takes to confirm. Usually it's well past 7 days before they're even able to tow the vehicle or cite it. So it's kind of a variety of ways that they try to determine that. They'll talk to other people that are inhabited their vehicles in the area, talk to neighbors. So it's kind of just a combination of things before they make that determination.
Okay, thanks.
Member Langton.
All right, I'll be done after this one. With regards to public bathrooms, it seems to be an issue across the board as far as some of these people living in vehicles. I know San Francisco has those ones that are like self-cleaning. They only put a few of them out. I think they became a haven for kind of drug addicts, and maybe, I do know they open every 30 seconds or something like that, or every 5 minutes. Has Mountain View looked into stuff like that, or what are the detractors? Yeah.
I can briefly respond to that. Back in 2017, there was a deeper review of the various hygiene needs when we had a stakeholder group looking at that on behalf of the council. And at the time, various things were looked at. There were some environmental composting restrooms, other types of strategies that are out there. I think one of the key challenge that comes up with that is a site that would be conducive to that. But at that time, in our case, we pursued a number of other options, which was, trying to pursue other programs such as safe parking at the time to give folks a more programmatic oriented environment with which to get some stability.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Very well. Looks like we are done, and it's time for public comment. Are there any members of the public who would like to ask questions? And we have
Mr. Chair, you haven't asked a
Yes.
question.
Yeah, I'm coming back to you guys, so I'll ask my questions at the end. So I have a couple hands up. You have 2 minutes, Mr. McKenzie.
Hi, all. Thanks for the really lively discussion and asking a lot of important questions and learned a bit. I'll highlight one thing that I heard during the presentation, which I liked a lot, that there was the transition, hiring someone, closing out a sworn officer role and hiring someone else, not having police deal with people, unsheltered people, unhoused people, trying to avoid criminalizing poverty, I think is a great step. And I just want to echo the comment or concern about where we're actually spending our resources, having people go out and mark chalk and spend so much time. It seems like a really, as a citizen of the city, I don't really like that as an investment of resources when these are people in need. And just with regards to the enforcement of 72 hours, it is completely different from Measure C. It's an unrelated ordinance. And my understanding from having read postings on the city, there are two things that make the enforcement process kind of, I don't quite understand how it complies with the ordinance itself. The ordinance says move 1,000 feet, and the odometer will be a valid mark of that, which would mean someone could move and return to the exact same spot if they were willing to show the odometer, which itself is a whole privacy issue separately. But that the letter of the law does not seem consistent with what is the enforcement procedure and the spirit of the law. That at least when I read it a few months ago, it said it was about an abandoned vehicle thing, to try to keep the public right of way if a vehicle has been abandoned. By definition, if someone is living in it, it's not an abandoned vehicle. So it seems the enforcement process that has just been outlined is contrary to both the letter and the spirit of the law. So I'm a little confused about that. And I'll just also note that one person who had their vehicle towed, for them to, it doesn't seem like it was just a one-off for them. That was probably a
Next, we have Zoom PA United.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, thank you.
Yes, I can.
Hi, my name is Marguerite. I live on Ortega Avenue, which after the oversized vehicle settlement is one of the longest sections of street in Mountain View where oversized vehicles can park. And I'm one of the community members whose desires Kimberly Thomas mentioned needing to be balanced with those living in their vehicles. Well, I'm here to say that my neighborhood benefits when everyone is taken care of and has the resources they need to live a dignified life. And I think the following would be good things to pursue. Number one, porta potties, or even better, a permanent restroom at Klein Park, which is on Ortega Avenue. Number two, reinterpretation of the 72-hour enforcement that ideally suspends this rule for oversized vehicles on wide streets, but at the very least allows them to return to their original parking spot. This is especially important given the scarcity of parking spots available to oversized vehicles as a result of the narrow street ordinance. The 72-hour rule is really about abandoned vehicles, as Tim McKenzie said, and people living in their vehicles are clearly not abandoning those vehicles. Number three, some people living in RVs struggle to move their vehicles because of necessary repairs, but they can't afford those repairs. So sometimes those repairs cost over $10,000, which is prohibitive, I think, probably for all of us even. When services such as showers, laundry, restrooms, etc. are not in walking distance, these people are effectively unable to access these services. And this speaks to the necessity of bringing services to the people that need them, rather than requiring those people to move in order to access them, highlighting again my call for a porta potty or permanent restroom at Klein Park. Number four, reallocate funding away from chalking and enforcement of the 72-hour rule and use that funding instead to prioritize more services. Lastly, with regard to the high number of complaints against oversized vehicles violating various rules, I'd like to add useful context there. When someone is in need of services, they call the various hotlines that the city provides for unstably housed community members. And the city keeps track of how many requests for aid there are. And when someone is upset about oversized vehicles, they call the police hotline. As Derek Langton mentioned, there are people who are, as he says—
Thank you. Your time is up. Ms. PD.
Hi there. Thanks so much for
all the conversation tonight. Definitely learned a ton from your presentation and all the interesting comments and questions that have just been shared so far. I really appreciate the compassionate approach and the fact that every single person seems to be approaching this issue with compassion for folks who need support. And I also think we can continue to do more. We can continue to improve. I'm hesitant to ever rest on our laurels by the narrative of we seem to be doing more than our neighbors. That's not a sign that we can back off, but maybe that other folks should continue to step up. And I've heard so many great ideas for how to further improve our response to this issue in our community. So thanks everyone for sharing all those. I heard a rumor that there was a residential parking permit program that had been either floated but never created, or created but never implemented. And I was curious if anyone in the city could speak to this or had heard of this, just because it seems like it could possibly be a more powerful incentive for vehicle residents to be assessed with the city. I think it was Kimberly Thomas who mentioned that the city's interested in having these residents be assessed to access things like county services, medical services, programs like Crestview and Life Moves. Well, it seems like these residents may not be interested in Crestview and Life Moves, but if they would be interested in a residential parking program that would allow them to stay put without being hassled and let MVPD officers do other job responsibilities rather than all this hassle of enforcement and chalking, it just seems to me like there could be a mutually beneficial solution if we were to look into a residential parking program that includes all MV residents, vehicle residents, and non-vehicle residents alike. So just curious if any looking into that had happened. I'm not timing myself, so I don't know where I am in my 2 minutes, but my other question is, I heard it rephrased a bunch that communication is being improved between different departments regarding enforcement, and that the goal is to always forward things through Officer McPherson to do this direction on the less expensive community partners for towing. But my curiosity is, in moments when that communication is not possible to communicate with
Ms.
us
Peavy.
directly, what happens?
Thank you. And next we have Mr. Brown.
Hey friends, been a while. So I got a few issues, but not enough for public comment. So the ordinance itself talks about parking in excess of 72 consecutive hours, and it mentions consecutive also in the text of section 19.72. That implies that it's not about the space, it is about the length of time at the space. It also talks about how, moving a short distance, like moving the vehicle a short distance, and the fact that it references the odometer means it does not actually talk about the spot, or being in the spot or returning to the spot. It implies strongly that it is a matter of circulation, of actually moving the vehicle throughout the town 1,000 feet, which does not prohibit moving to the same spot. And that interpretation, I don't think, is in the text or any interpretation of the text that I could find. The abandoned vehicle thing not working on streets because they're considered highways is its own weird part of the code. Anyway, I'll get to the point. Kimberly, we're doing good things in the city. I like that. I think that there's a lot of stuff that's being offered, but gating services behind signing up, going to shelters or engaging in case management or other kind of things feels very coercive. It doesn't feel like you're actually respecting people and their dignity and autonomy and giving them a choice of how they live their lives, but instead dictating how they should live and how they should want to engage with the city or housing. It just feels very disrespectful to individuals who otherwise might just want to live in a car because that's how they're comfortable. That's a choice that they should be allowed to make, but also have a bathroom that they can get to at a reasonable time. They might not want to have to deal with safe parking or people in safe parking or the location of the parking lots. And that's something that they should be allowed to choose. Just because of people. Yep. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. We can now go back to the board for any final comments and questions. Member IR. You are muted.
Okay, I wasn't swearing, really. I wasn't. So Mr. Frank, you're Chair Frank, you're gonna wrap us all up, right? I was gonna cede my spot to you, but you're gonna be the very last word, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, so I heard some things in the public comment that I like, and then I had one question for Captain Canfield because we had a separate conversation. Maybe I'll start there, and then I want to pick up on some of the public comment that I want to find out a little more about. Captain Canfield, you and I chatted about the Parks and Rec Department talking about reducing public bathroom hours because of an influx in graffiti, especially hate graffiti in park bathrooms. And so they were talking about reducing the hours that public bathrooms were going to be open. Have you heard any more on that? And is that going forward?
I have not heard anything more on it. It's certainly something that we can follow up on and see what actions have been taken. But I do know that graffiti and vandalism in the bathroom was an important issue to the Parks Department and to the Police Department and to a lot of members of the community in which it was happening. But certainly I can circle back and find out what action has been taken and if it's been taken, when they anticipate that going back to normal and what the plan is moving forward. But I don't have an answer for you right now.
Okay. I'd like to understand that because I do think that people make a correlation between keeping bathrooms open 24 hours is that the person in the vehicle who's walking with their kid to the bathroom is the one doing the graffiti. And there's actually, and I learned this from Tom Myers at CSA, there's no correlation between keeping bathrooms open longer and graffiti. If people are going to do graffiti, they will find a time to do graffiti, but that's not mean, doesn't mean our neighbors who live in vehicles are the ones doing the graffiti. So I want to point that out. Okay, so my request for porta potties has doubled since I heard from Marguerite. I think we should have a porta potty over at Independence and Pioneer and over there, and we should have a porta potty at Klein Park. So now I'm gonna be taking that forward and being loud about that. I'm curious about this residential parking program. Did we have one? Did we consider one? I didn't fully understand. Was there something that was looked at that got backed off of? I like it as an idea for a way to assess people. Can someone help me with that? Because I hadn't heard about that before.
I have some context maybe from a number of years ago, but Audrey, you have
Kimberly, could you respond to that question, please?
Sure. I think the context of what was raised here was a residential parking permit program. The city of Mountain View has a residential parking permit program that is functional for fixed housing residents that live within fixed housing. And then the city, a number of years back in 17, 18, around the time it was looking at a variety of other solutions, did look deeply at whether you could permit particular locations for residents who wouldn't be in a fixed unit, but would be in a mobile unit. And that was deemed at that time to be not something that would be legal in that context. Various gradations for that. I'm not an attorney, but there were staff reports that discussed that. And so again, a variety of other strategies were approved and pursued. And those are what we've been working on for the last number of years.
Thank you. Is it possible, Kimberly, for us to see those staff reports from 17, 18 or 16, 17? Sorry.
We can certainly pull them together, or also we can get additional advisement as needed from our city attorney's office. They're the ones who would analyze that, but we're certainly happy to gather any of that background.
Anything that has been previously published from there, I would like to make available because I find the thought intriguing. I just want to understand what's been explored so far. So I'm not, talking about the same thing that we know gets to a dead end. I don't want to waste people's time that way. So that would be amazing if that could happen. So there was a question and then that I was interested in. So all roads lead to Officer McPherson is what I understood. What happens if communication does not lead there and it goes astray or goes, I think that was what Ms. Petey was trying to get to. And I'm interested in that. What happens? Does, if, is Officer McPherson brought in for every case? Or, what happens when Officer McPherson is not involved?
So we definitely try to have redundancy at the department. So Officer McPherson is, the lead community outreach officer, but she also works closely with Scott Thomas, Sergeant Scott Thomas, with Lieutenant Atkins. And I can say we have had dozens of meetings over the last couple months between the NES unit, the traffic unit, parking enforcement officers, community service officers, just trying to figure out internally how we were going to sort through this, what type of process we're going to use for talking, what type of process we're going to use for communication. So it's really been a work in progress for us. You know, we've had to change how we do things. We've had to change communication. So when things like that come up, I think we handle it the way most businesses or organizations would. We get all the correct people in the room and we try to talk about how we're going to fix it so it doesn't happen again next time. And whether that includes, you know, officers and other units need to know that they can reach out to not only Jen Leah, but if she's not available, they can go to Scott Thomas. If he's not there, they can go to Matt Atkins. So just letting people know what the resources are if the usual person isn't available. But yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of meetings and we try to make sure people know where to go if they can't get a hold of the person they usually contact.
Thank you. I wish we could clone you, Officer McPherson, but I know our technology is not quite there. Thank you.
Okay, looks like that's everyone. I have a couple questions of my own. First, Kimberly, you mentioned there's 3 lots, and I wasn't aware that there was 3. I thought there was only 2, that Shoreline and Evelyn. Where is the third?
The additional lot is on Tarabella. So we have we have 3 city lots that are all either ours that we own or that we lease. So there's Shoreline, there's Evelyn, there's Tarabella, and then we still have participation by Lord's Grace Church. And, you know, it's currently on hiatus, but St. Tim's was also a participant in our faith-related program.
Great. Okay, great. And just so everybody understands, the public comment on this item has been closed, just so everybody understands that. And then I have so this is an issue that's personal to me because I have experienced this, which is that towing is cost prohibitive, especially for people who are struggling already. And so what is the process if you tow someone's home, because that's really what this is, how do they get it back? And is it, you know, like my neighbor told me a story about getting towed in the city of San Francisco, and when the lady in front of her and she got to the towing place, it was $700 to get the car back. And this poor young woman was like, you have to keep the car. I don't have that. And so is that what we're doing here? Is that what happens, is if the person can't afford to get the car back, they just lose their home? Can someone explain like what happened there?
No. Scott, are you okay?
Yeah, so when a vehicle is towed, they get it's actually a California Highway Patrol, a CHP form, and the back of that form explains to them the process that they can go through to get that out. The first step on that is coming to the police department to get a release notification signed. So once they come here, there is a storage fee that they pay to the department, and that's set by the vehicle code, what we're allowed to charge. I don't know exactly what that is offhand. I think it's around $150. I could be wrong, but I think it's around that price. Once we get that release, then they can go to the tow company to get the vehicle released. And the tow company does charge them based upon how long it's been there. So the sooner they can get the vehicle out, the better. They are allowed to charge daily rates. So, you know, if it's there for 2 weeks, it would be longer than if it was only there for 2 days. But I couldn't quote you what those rates are. I know that Officer McPherson, again, has gotten some community groups to help folks get the vehicle's fees paid for. We have also waived the fees in a few limited circumstances where we found out that, you know, it was maybe a communication error for us. We did do that in one of the cases that was talked about today. So I don't have specific amounts for you, but that's generally the process of how it works. And we have had some very generous community groups that have helped with the fees to the tow companies to get those paid for.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, cool. And then I just have a comment. I think I've kind of told mostly everybody at some point or another that I bumped into Officer McPherson on the street, out in the world doing her thing, and I'm super proud that she represents sort of the city and the department, the way that she interacts with people on the street. It's caring, it's loving, she's working as a resource. She's just so delightful out there representing us and trying to help people. She's offering resources. She's, checking on folks, and if their vehicles don't work, she's helping them figure out how to, get it so that it does work. And what I saw on the street was, the city sending a representative out to help people. And I was just really impressed with her work, and I was really impressed with her. And you guys, you have a real star there in her work. So thank you for all your efforts and your service, Officer McPherson. And with that, we could move on to the next item on our agenda, I believe. Second here. This is the subcommittee for RIPA data recommendations. And this item will be presented by the RIPA data subcommittee members, Member Brodowski and Member Langton and Captain Canfield. And Mike, you can take it away.
Absolutely. Just give me one moment to share my screen and start my PowerPoint.
Yeah, I'm Member IR.
I'm so sorry. Some of you know, I broke my shoulder in 4 places, and I really apologize. I'm trying to be a good member, but the pain's a little bit too much, and I even double dosed before this meeting. So I really apologize. I need to excuse myself. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. This is the presentation from the RIPA subcommittee recommendations, or for the RIPA subcommittee recommendations. And as just some background, let me move we've got a busy screen here. Thank you. Just as a background, this is the, sorry, there we go. Okay, in the fall of 2020, the city prioritized the review of our traffic stop data, the Mountain View Police Department's traffic stop data, to look at disparities or trends with the MVPD's contacts with members of our community. This was done with the city manager's office and the MVPD, partnering with Stanford University and the University of Michigan as part of a coalition to research police data. This process thankfully resulted in the hiring of Alex Stevenson, a research fellow from Cal Berkeley. Stevenson was brought on board, reporting to the city manager's office and to the police chief, and was given full and unfettered access, years of Mountain View PD traffic stop data, and additionally was able to go on ride-alongs and interact with members of the department to understand how the data that he was examining was collected. His work was to review what the nature of and observe disparities in traffic stops were by the Mountain View Police Department, and was to observe disparities, if disparities were indicative of potential bias in the Mountain View Police Department, and lastly, what information should be collected moving forward for the police department. As you may remember, Fellow Stevenson's detailed report contained his research methodology, which included a really important component, the use of the Veil of Darkness standard. The Veil of Darkness standard is a research methodology used to evaluate the potential difference the perceived race of a driver makes by comparing stops when the driver's face can be seen during the daylight to stops when the driver's face is obscured during darkness. And that's utilized around daylight savings time, if you recall. And that Fellow Stevenson presented to the PSAB both on the 24th of June and 26th of August in 2021. In his final report, he found that there was no clear evidence that the MVPD's stop decisions were discriminatory, and that there was mixed evidence of disparities with regards to the decisions to search a car. In his presentation to the PSAB, Stevenson explained that in regards to mixed evidence terminology, clear conclusions are difficult to draw due to the small number of searches conducted by MVPD over the time frame of interest. Therefore, evaluations of these decisions should be done with caution. Fellow Stevenson's report did recommend the continued review of MVPD's data, including the RIPA data when it began to be collected. Which brings us to a brief overview of what RIPA is. RIPA is the Racial and Identity Profiling Act, RIPA for short. RIPA data collection became a statutory requirement for the Mountain View Police Department in January of last year, 2022. And that it was phased in depending on the size of the organization. So Mountain View, being a mid-sized police agency, had to begin reporting last year. With the state requiring the collection of data related to police detentions and consent searches. For background, detention for the purpose of RIPA was anytime an officer was stopping somebody and they were not free to leave. And a consent search was essentially anytime an officer was asking for permission of a subject to be searched by that officer. The required data sets were both the date and time and the duration of the stop, the location of the stop, the officers perceived what the officer perceived as the race or ethnicity of the person they stopped, the perceived gender of the person stopped, whether the person stopped was perceived to be a member of the LGBT community, the perceived age of the person stopped, whether the person stopped had limited or no English fluency, if they were perceived to have a disability, what the reason for the stop was, and whether or not the stop was a response to a call for service. And lastly, what the action taken was during that stop. So whether the person was searched, arrested, cited, or just reprimanded. The state required quarterly submission, and does require quarterly submission of this RIPA data to the California Department of Justice. But that data, as we submit it quarterly to the DOJ, isn't aggregated out on their portals by agencies. So you can't access Mountain View specific data through the DOJ. Additionally, the Mountain View Police Department collects non-required information, so different data sets than what were highlighted above. So we collect information as to the additional information is whether the officer making the contact believed the subject was having a mental health crisis or mental health related challenges at the time of the contact, and at what point from the officer's perspective did they believe that they knew the subject's race or gender. And just as a work plan background, this was obviously a work plan item, and it was from the 21-22 PSAB work plan. It was adopted by City Council on the 28th of September in 21, and it included a project to develop and recommend follow-up actions related to that report by Fellow Stevenson, with a focus on the MVPD's implementation of that RIPA requirement and exploring methods to make policing data more open and accessible to the public. On February 24th of 2022, at the PSAB meeting, the board, you created the RIPA subcommittee consisting of members Brodowski, Langton, and then Vice Chair Frink. The suggested work from that meeting for the subcommittee was to review MVPD's process for collecting and submitting RIPA data to the state, to review and provide input on data generated from RIPA stops, to review and provide input on community sentiment on the data collected from MVPD, to explore and develop recommendations on ways to make MVPD data more open and available to the public, to advise the MVPD on ways to partner with community to determine additional data sharing that may be useful in the future, and to provide updates to the PSAB for recommendations. And I'll give you a little bit of the background before the subcommittee members speak, but just some of the background on the research that the subcommittee did conduct. They began this process by researching and reviewing the background, the legislation, and what the actual act, the RIPA Act itself, and then reviewing the data sets collected and required, all the requirements that we do submit, and then reviewed the user experience, that interface that our officers have, as well as the data entry process and the appropriate department policies that we have related to RIPA. And that was done by Professional Standards Unit Sergeant, or with Professional Standards Unit Sergeant Matt Atkins at the time, now Lieutenant Atkins from this evening. And then they examined the department's RIPA data. So they looked at the data once we were able to collect it. They examined the data that we were submitting and the subsequent DOJ audit. So the DOJ examined the accuracy with which we submitted information, and they were able to review that audit as well. And then lastly, they discussed and reviewed the work by Research Fellow Stevenson and discussed the challenges and the process for his work. And he provided perspective for the subcommittee on their work. And next will be subcommittee outreach. And this will be presented by Member Vodovsky.
Thank you. How do I get on? I'd like to begin by, am I being seen?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I'd like to
Well,
begin, yeah.
You're seen, but you're in the, so we're still sharing the slide. So you're seen, but you're small, if that's okay, but you
Yeah,
can
no,
be
that's
heard.
fine. No, I need
That's
the
fine.
slide. I need the slide too. I'd like to begin by going over again what RIPA means, because every single time we have a meeting or we're talking about RIPA data, I think, what do the letters mean? And so I'll just repeat them again. RIPA means Racial and Identity Profiling Act. And so it's a legislation of the state of California that the Mountain View Police Department has to follow, and that's why it collects this data and tries to use it. So the RIPA subcommittee, which included Derek Langton, Cleve Frank, Joan Brodowski, and Mike Canfield, with the help of our staff, made a list of community stakeholders we thought would represent different parts of our community, looking at especially Latinos or LGBT, housing insecure people, and so on. We were looking for organizations of people who historically have been marginalized or have not had strong connections to our police department, or they had not had easy access to the police department, or they hadn't felt comfortable around the police, or people who don't speak English fluently, or not at all, or who otherwise may not have spoken out within the community. So we understood that our community or communities are diverse, and no group, if we try to talk to one person in a group, like one person in the Latino community, he's certainly not going to reflect what everybody in that group would say. However, even so, we got some good information. We developed a questionnaire, we had a conversation guide or something like that to use when we were talking to the people we interviewed. The idea was to gauge in each case how important the RIPA data was or could be to that group, how the group might use the data, how the group would like the data formatted if it showed up, and how best to make it available to the group or groups. And then we got the feedback either through direct telephone conversations with representatives of the different groups, or in some cases, just by email response. Some people just wanted to see the questionnaire and said they'd answer on email. So then the next part of this is slide 2. Do we have slide 2? Or would you like? Yeah. So the themes that we picked up when we interviewed all of these people, for instance, we often had 2 people in one segment. For instance, where I talked to 2 different people from the Cafecito group. And we could identify themes that were common to all of them and other themes that were picked up by one group and not another, but here are the important ones. The RIPA data that the Mountain View Police Department gathers should be provided online and should be provided visually and also graphically. Visually could mean something written textual, but graphically means in tables or in graphs. And a lot of people felt this was important. And people mentioned that the data should be put, and this means in a tabular form that can be manipulated, meaning that if people wanted to take the data and further slice and dice, that they could do that. Then everybody said, oh, the data should be presented in the languages of Mountain View, which are Spanish, Mandarin, and Russian, plus English, of course. And of course, everybody wants the data to be easily accessed. They don't want us to have to go digging through files or having to make a big application and pay $105 to get access to the data. They said that they would like to have the data to inform their groups how safe they can feel with the Mountain View Police Department. And this way, community aid providers can help their clients navigate their individual challenges. They could even identify patterns or problems in time to allow early interventions. I think all of us have early intervention on our mind after the 2 shootings this past week. If the RIPA data and reports are printed and made freely available, community members who may not review it online could have access. People like the idea of frequent postings of RIPA data. I think they'd love to have it every day, see what the data comes out daily. But frequent could mean easily quarterly or even by semester. And finally, they want that the RIPA data be identified, that points to discrimination. And they say that this will allow the Mountain View Police Department to identify any trend that could be concerning early. So these were the things that we gathered, and I will let Derek go on to complete the presentation.
Okay, ultimately, the subcommittee came up with some recommendations. We took great care in learning about RIPA, its requirements, the process of collecting the data, and hearing what was important from a broad swath of our community. And it is with that foundation that the RIPA subcommittee, myself, Member Brodowski, and Chair Frank made the following recommendations to the PSAB. We feel that MVPD should conduct annual RIPA compliance reviews of each officer to ensure accuracy and adherence to policy, and that the MVPD implement a system to conduct additional random RIPA compliance reviews amongst their department. The MVPD should create an interactive dashboard displaying RIPA data in a format that is easily viewed on mobile devices as well as your standard desktop. We really wanted to emphasize being viewed on mobile to kind of like try to engage kind of the minority community or the more, people that just don't have the cash for like an internet connection at home. The MVPD should publish quarterly RIPA data in CSV format, allowing for the public to review and examine the data. Quarterly publication of RIPA data should be made in English, Spanish, Russian, and Mandarin for posting on the city's webpage, as Joan spoke of earlier. MVPD should distribute the data to community groups and stakeholders in both an electronic and a hard copy format. RIPA data should be made available upon request at the police station. The MVPD should continue to look for opportunities to listen to community voices and look for new and more effective means to make its RIPA data transparent and accessible to the entire community. I think that leaves you, Mike.
I think so. And just want to cover some potential next steps. They're very similar to the recommendations, obviously, but including kind of some staff expectations or intent as well. So to continue to collect both the required RIPA data and the additional data sets that we've elected to collect, to collaborate with Research Fellow Stevenson to ensure continued external data analysis, including applying applicable RIPA data to his existing research that he's already done and work that he's done, to research and implement an interactive and mobile-friendly RIPA data dashboard, work with the city manager's office in the city to publish quarterly RIPA data in English, Spanish, Russian, and Mandarin on the city's website, and work with the city to place the RIPA data on the new restructured website as that begins to be rolled out. Make quarterly RIPA data available upon request, as mentioned, in the CSV format and in paper formats. To publish the accessibility of its RIPA data across the department's various social media platforms and directly to stakeholders, and seek feedback on continuing methods for RIPA data access and transparency, and to draft and implement policy for a supervisor to review every officer's RIPA entry accuracy and policy adherence, and to implement additional random internal audits. That concludes the recommendations and the potential next steps, and so we're open for your questions.
Anyone have any questions about the RIPA data? Yes, Vice Chair Wang.
Thank you for the presentation of information. I have two questions. The first one is quicker, so I'll start with that one. What does it mean to, or I guess, what are the methods around which officers are using to see if someone is perceived to be LGBT?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. That's a requirement that came from the state. And really, there's not necessarily one way to know, but what it gauges is what the officer thinks. So if you're looking for bias from an officer, you look for what the officer thinks. So I guess that's really going to be kind of an individual basis. I don't think that every member of the LGBT community can, it all looks the same or is monolithic in any way, but that is the challenge for the officers, is if they believe, to assess the people that they're contacting, and if they believe that they were a member of that community, to indicate that.
So when we have this data and we're like looking at it after we collect it in the future, do we use this data to inform like policy or like structural or procedural changes around the way that officers treat members of the LGBTQ community, or is it that it's kind of a reflection on the officers themselves?
Well, I think it really informs both of those things. So the information that comes out can certainly inform policy and larger decisions, training, hiring practices, recruiting practices. Those things are certainly all potentially informed by the RIPA data. And there could be also information that could benefit the officers about their behavior. But it's also important to note that there can be variables that might really affect the data associated to an individual officer's RIPA stops. If let's say they work downtown and there's a predominantly LGBT bar in that area, then they may have different numbers than somebody who works in a different area. So just that's really one of the main reasons we want professional external review of the data, to ensure that there is a keen and thoughtful eye that can understand the different elements and the ability to best analyze it without falling into some easily kind of made mistakes when reviewing data.
Thank you. And then in regards to my next question, and I know you covered this a little bit in the memo, but I just want to get some more information. What are kind of the standards to which we're assessing the data after we collect it? So like we're starting to get more data now. In the future, kind of what are we measuring it up against to kind of be a, like where do we want to be as a city and a police department in terms of the data and kind of what we see?
Yeah, I think what's important is one, to continuously grow, and as we get more data and as we're seeing better methodology being approached with the data, to examine that and evaluate its benefit for us. In the short term, speaking with Alex Stevenson, we think it's very beneficial to apply the research that he's already done and to overlap those numerous applicable data sets from RIPA, certainly not every data set from RIPA, but many data sets from RIPA, and continue that research that he's done or continue the research methodology with the new data and see a lot of benefit and value to that. But that doesn't mean that that's, you know, the place that the process ends, but it's certainly a good place to pick up and start utilizing this data that we're getting in. We have 1 year of data at this point, but much of that data can overlap with 5 or 6 years of existing data.
Thank you. Just kind of for the future, I'm interested in maybe like in a year, kind of coming back as a board or as a committee, as you guys as a committee, and kind of setting standards to which we want to see or want to be at. And I think that help us kind of move forward in general and be more actionable. So that's just a suggestion of kind of reflecting a year and then seeing kind of setting some standards and what we want to do.
Thank you. Member Langton.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of reply to Jeanette's question about identifying LGBTQ members on a traffic stop. There's actually a lot that goes on a typical traffic stop. The officer engages with one or both occupants or multiple occupants in the car. Usually asks questions somewhat along the line of, what are you doing here? Where have you been? Where are you coming from? Where are you going? You know, the person can sometimes just volunteer that they just came out of a gay bar. They may be traveling with their spouse, their wife, their, you know, significant other. You know, there's just a lot of conversation that really goes on with a typical traffic stop that an officer can make some assumptions. They may at times be wrong, but there are ways to kind of make a best guess. It isn't always exact, but you know, there is a fair amount of information that is exchanged in a typical traffic stop that you might be able to make some assessment like that, not just looking at the physical mannerisms of the person, but just kind of more of an evidence-based assumption.
Thank you, sir. And just for everybody's edification, I think he makes those comments based on his experience in years in the business. So in case you didn't know that. Member Tang.
Thanks. I guess this is not about RIPA data specifically, but I'm just like curious because now we've been through, like, since we did the study, we've now been through another cycle of daylight savings being implemented and then being over. And I wonder if we have another set of data for the study for, God, the name is
Veil of Darkness.
Veil of Darkness. Thank you. Thank you. What do I do without you guys? I'm wondering if we have another set of data to take a look at to expand that the data that we already have.
So I can answer that. Fellow Stevenson is here and certainly is more qualified to answer that than I am. Alex, would you like to jump in for that one?
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
The short answer to your question, Member Tang, is yes. You certainly could. The requirements to run, so if we think of it as what the test is doing is you need periods of time for which we would imagine that officers could view inside the vehicle of a car and see the people inside the car, and then a similar time for which we would imagine those people would also be on the road, but you could not. So if you have an additional year of data, that is the minimal requirement from a data perspective. As mentioned in previous reports to the subcommittee, and I think from Mike's briefing there are other assumptions that go into a veil of darkness test, but those are not necessarily data assumptions in terms of what data exists, but rather assumptions that you have to believe about the data generating process. So the big one is you would have to believe that in this last year, it is the case that individuals who were on the road at 6:20 in the evening in March would be the same kinds or types of individuals who'd be on the road at 6:20 p.m. in November.
Very good. Any other questions? Very good. I just had this one comment in that we don't, I think we've discussed this before, Mike, but we have a relatively small data set. And so this is a thing that's going to take years to sort of reveal some trends based on the number of inputs that we'll have in it. But over time, it will start to reveal more, less the aberrations that come up from every now and then.
Yeah, I think to that point was part of Fellow Stevenson's recommendation to apply the existing or support of applying the existing work to the new data.
Copy that, understood. Very good. Okay, if there are no further questions, may I have a motion to approve these recommendations?
Chair
What
Frank,
was that? Yes, ma'am?
would you like to call for public comment?
Oh, thank you. I forgot. Let's see here. I have a question from, let's see here, Mr. England. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Frank. Hear me okay?
Yep.
Yep.
Cool, thank you. Cool. Okay, Bruce England speaking for MVCPRA. We have a few points. We heard the discussion. Sounds like you covered a lot of what we have to say, but I'll mention these things anyway. The Traffic Pedestrian Stop Analysis Subcommittee, is that the name? Because we've seen different names in different places. So if there's an official name, it'd be great to be consistent, to use the same name everywhere. The recommendations you've got are a great place to start, and we do agree with them. Sounds like you talked about this, but should the data also be published on the PSAB webpage? Sounds like you're doing it in CSV files and in multiple languages. It's really great. Maybe you're following the model that BPAC and PD set for traffic data there. But anyway, it's a good move. And a clarification about the final recommendation. It says continued opportunities for MPVD to listen to community voices. I think that's MVPD. What do those opportunities look like? Quarterly reports to PSAB, ongoing meetings of this subcommittee that get shared out at PSAB. We're just not sure. And then lastly, a clarification, our understanding is that LGBTQ relates to sexual orientation, and that differs from GIE, which is gender identity and expression. So profiling practices to identify LGBTQ don't necessarily make sense in this context. Somebody can only tell what his or her sexual orientation is, potentially. And that's it for our comments and questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. McKenzie.
Hi, all. Thanks, committee members, for your, clearly you put a lot of thought and work into this, and thanks for the presentation. It was well done. I really want to highlight and call out some of the things that you did suggest, having the data in like a visual dashboard type thing, like the Santa Clara County COVID dashboard that these days I don't really look at as much as I did back early pandemic, but having that sort of easily looked at and like point and click sort of manipulation, but then also providing it for people to have access to really cut it up. I think Member Brodowski said, I forget the exact turn of phrase, but I liked it. And also the making it compatible with mobile devices, a really key and important thing. Wouldn't it be great if we had some municipal broadband and people didn't have to worry about internet costs, but that's not the world we live in. So thinking and preparing for that. And I wanna highlight that I commend MVPD for collecting extra data other than just what's required by state law. In particular, I did like the officer marking down when in the interaction they themselves thought that they could perceive the various things that they had to mark down by law. I think that is a really key piece of data that will kind of show how the interactions develop in a way that really gives shed some light in that wouldn't have been shed just with the baseline data. So thanks for being thoughtful about what that data is and having done that outreach and how to present it, and look forward to seeing it as it develops.
It looks like we lost Tim, so we'll move on to community member Lee. We have 3 minutes.
Hi, yes, this is Paying Lee. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a community member in Mountain View. And I wanted to actually affirm one of the earlier public comments by Bruce in regards to the profiling practices with LGBTQ. Yeah, at least from my understanding, sexual orientation is something when someone can only really tell you. So I think that trying to profile for gender, perceived gender is possible, but sexual orientation is different. And perhaps, I don't know, with more work being done on your work plans, is reaching out to possibly county programs or community organizations that have training on sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. I think one of the common things I'm hearing now is SOGI 101. And I think this difference and distinction is really important when we are approaching people in our community, because these are really important diversity elements of our identities. So I think I just wanted to confirm, and I would support reaching out to other community organizations and getting more input on this, because it is a valuable data point to gather, I think, but the distinction is also really important. So thank you so much for your work on this, but just want to bring that up. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that's everybody, and we'll take it back to the board. Member Tang.
My question is for Captain Canfield. Is identifying sexual orientation and gender identity and expression mandated by the RIPA legislation itself?
Yes, yeah, that is a requirement, and I understand the complexity and I appreciate the comments, but that is a requirement from the state. So that is not something that we have the option to collect or not collect, or to edit when we collect it and submit it to the DOJ.
Thank you. And if there are no other questions, I think I'm ready for a motion to approve the, oh, we have one more from Member Sandhu. You're muted still.
I jumped the gun. I was going to propose to approve it, and I wanted to compliment the 3 members for such an amazing job. Really, very fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, may I have a motion to approve them, their recommendations?
Yes, I did.
Oh, so I think Member Sandhu was approving. And then I need a second.
I second.
Okay, let's put off for a second. And Ms. Ramberg, would you like to call the roll?
I will. Chair Frank,
Yes.
Vice Chair Wang,
Yes.
Member Brodowski,
Yes.
Member Langton,
Yes.
Member Sandhu,
Yes, indeed.
and Member Tang.
Aye.
That passes 5-0, or sorry, 6-0.
Thank you. With that, we can move on to item 6, which is staff comments, questions, and reports from PSAB members. The next item is board staff comments, questions, and committee reports. No action will be taken on any questions raised by the PSAB at this time. Do any PSAB members or staff have any comments or questions? Member Tang.
So I don't know, should we do this one at a time? Because I had a couple things I wanted to bring up. But the first one was, this is the last meeting that I can take from the comfort of my home with my cat in my lap. But that's not the point. I knew that that was coming. The point is that I was wondering about hybrid capabilities for our community members to be able to tune in. And I had been hearing that other other advisory bodies have been using council chambers and also the atrium room, which is AV equipped to do hybrid.
Anything
Chair
else?
Frank, I'm happy to respond to that question. And thank you, Member Tang, for sharing it with me ahead of time. The 2 meeting rooms that are currently equipped for streamed and live participation video are the council chambers and atrium. There are 3 advisory boards that or bodies that use the chambers, and that is limited to those that are policy making or quasi adjudicatory bodies. So in addition to the council, that includes the Environmental Planning Commission and the Rental Housing Commission. And those meetings are staffed for the streaming through contracts with KMVT, which is the provider of public educational and governmental programming for Mountain View. We don't currently use that room or have those contracts in place for any of the other bodies in the city. The atrium is the small conference room on the first floor, and there are a handful of advisory bodies that have historically used that space. And it is one of the rooms that, with all the supply chain issues, we were able to get set up for hybrid or for basically, teleconference capabilities. And that was primarily done to support meetings internally with staff or between staff and stakeholders, and not for publicly noticed broad participation type meetings, in that it is a very small room. The table takes up almost all of the space in the room, and so it's difficult for there to be space for the public to sit comfortably and address the commission. And so that's not the room that we had identified for the PSAB to meet in. That's the plaza room, which is the room that more of the commissions do meet in. That room is not yet set up with teleconferencing capabilities. And what my office is charged with is trying to come up with both the technology and the staffing plan that will have a kind of consistent and clear plan for all the advisory bodies, rather than having some by virtue of which room they're in or by virtue of their staff capacity. We might be able to do that in a small start and expanding to more with a well thought out pilot. But we don't have that planned out at this point. It's and in part it's not for lack of wanting, it's not for lack of knowing that this time would be coming, but the technology issues have been very impacted by different things like the room setup and what that would, how you would capture all inputs and all audio that would be happening in a room like the plaza, and also just the staff capacity. It's not quite like having two meetings, but when you have the setup and the running of both what's happening physically in the room and what's happening remotely, it requires more, kind of more hands on deck, more effort, and more training to make sure that everybody knows how to do that. So we're not ready. Long story short, we're not ready to seamlessly move in February to having the advisory bodies, including PSAB, be able to meet in a hybrid format. Definitely understand the value of that, in that there is an increase we've seen in people's ability to participate, and we would like to keep that going, and we're committed to working on that, and I will keep you all posted on our progress in being able to do that.
Thanks for the info. I wish we could just all get cozy in the plaza for or what the atrium, sorry, in the atrium in the meantime. But COVID things. The second question I was going to raise was around the search for a new chief and what that process is like, and how can community members get involved and all of that.
Chief Canfield.
I'm happy to answer that question. We are at a pretty early stage in the process of designing the process, determining kind of the scope and the steps for picking the right best next person to lead the Mountain View Police Department. And it obviously is a very important choice. So it needs to be a well thought out and deliberate process. So since we're early in that, I don't really have any details to share about it. I think that in terms of your particular interest in what would be the community's role, typically for the city manager's choice of department heads, that is an operational decision. It's not a decision that even the council weighs in on. So there is not typically a community role in selecting the department heads that report to the city manager. And that doesn't mean that we don't understand the interest. And so one of the things that might be a helpful thing for us to know and consider within the process are the kinds of leadership qualities that the PSAB, and if there are members of the public who submit that information, the PSAB would hope to have be considered in the selection process, or kind of the community issues. That's something that feedback I think is a reasonable thing for the PSAB to be a conduit to have me as staff to the PSAB communicate to the city manager for her use in designing the process and moving forward through that process to select the next police chief.
Thank you.
The other thing I would say is that Captain Chief Shung is the police chief through mid-February. And at that point of his departure, Max Bozell, former police chief, will return as interim police chief, so that we have steady and continuous leadership as the recruitment process is designed and carried out.
Okay. Thank you. Member Langton? You're on mute.
Yeah, I hit the wrong button. I just wanted to add a little sub comment to the LGBT component of the RIPA data. I'm kind of just happy that they're trying to assess that. I know it's complicated, to really identify people in a non-biased manner as LGBT. But the fact that there's being an attempt made, I think is great.
Yeah, I would second that. Not that we have it here, but if it would identify an officer with a trend towards, picking on members of the LGBT community, I think this data is supposed to sort of borne that out, and I think it's a worthy effort, even though it's complicated. Anyone else? Okay, very good. Yes, Ms. Rampert.
I would just like to thank the members of the PSAB for participating in the Brown Act training, either by attending it live or watching the video that was made available afterwards. It is part of our efforts to make sure that we're continuing to support you and all the other advisory bodies in being able to run effective and legal meetings and proceedings. So thank you all very much for doing that.
Thank you. Actually, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. So yes, Member Langton.
Nope, I'm not on mute. I was just curious, not that I'm planning on missing any more meetings. I definitely had some health problems this year. But they said that there's potential to video conference into a meeting if you were like in the hospital or something and you had internet access, but if the rooms aren't set up for that, does that mean that that's not an option right now?
Thank you for that question, Member Langton. So within the Brown Act, before the pandemic, there were ways that under limited circumstances, people could participate remotely, with the location of their participation needing to be placed on the agenda, and with the place that they were participating in the meeting having the agenda posted such that if any members of the public in that location, like for example, at a conference, on the East Coast, wanted to, step in and comment on that item, that they'd be allowed the opportunity to do that. And then there'd need to be the appropriate method for the person, at least by voice, to participate. And that's what we did on very rare occasions before COVID and before there was even video. It was through kind of sophisticated speakerphone. With recent legislation that has, there was a return to the regular Brown Act, but then an add-on that said there are some reasons, for example, through illness or other things, that a member can be able to participate remotely without those special agenda additions, enhancements. And again, that could be through a video or an effective speakerphone, and not necessarily through video if we were still in a place where we didn't have the technology to do video conferencing. One thing I didn't note in response to Member Chang's question is that we do now have the vendor and the equipment scheduled to do the work in the Plaza conference room. So that is more imminent. I mean, it's been one of those things that was just around the corner for about a year, but it is more concretely imminent, such that if you do find yourself in that situation again, where you anticipate being away, you've coordinated with us, we can accommodate it, then we would work through those things on a case-by-case basis.
All right, thanks for the comment.
Welcome.
Member Sandu.
Yes, I agree with Audrey. Thank you, Ms. Ramberg. In fact, it did happen a decade ago when I was in the HRC. I was away in Singapore and I did partake in the commission's meeting, and we did use the old-fashioned phone I used basically Skype phone to chime in and go through the whole meeting, and that was kind of fun, right? But it'd be nice if we can just make it so easy to have it in a local pub, right? Let everybody come and watch us in action. But that'll never happen. We'd have to be on city property. So yeah, great. It's great to see everyone here, but it'd be fantastic to see everyone in person too. I think the only person, two people I've met, I met Captain Mike. I met, Kimberly a long time ago, Cleve and Kavita at the get together at Shoreline. That was fun too. I think Audrey, you were there too, yes. So looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, I neglected to thank Kimberly and her staff and Scott and the remaining parts of his team, Captain Nelson. So Audrey, if you would mind passing my thanks to them. Great presentation from those guys, and I really appreciate their service and their work. And with that, we are adjourned.